for you to see it better, those who are joining us today. Today with us is Muriel Poisson, who is the program specialist working for the International Institute of Educational Planning, working in the framework of UNESCO. She's based in Paris, France. Together with us is also Yuri Androshchuk, who is the co-founder for Open School Platform and is a representative of fund called Union. It's an NGO based in Kherson, which started and initiated this platform. Together with us is also Svetlana Agadjanyan, who is a representative of an NGO called Ukraine of Opportunities. The organization is based in Druzhkivka, Donetsk oblast, and they have experience of implementing open school in their town. And along with that, we also have Svetlana Lazebnik, head of the Department of Education in Druzhkivka, Donetsk oblast, who has also been involved in the process of implementing open school in this area. With us today are also the authors of this case study, Oksana Hus, who is right now a fellow at Bologna University, and she specializes in open government studies and anti-corruption studies. And my name is Alexandra Koidel. I'm also working at Berlin Graduate School for Global and Trans-Regional Studies, and I also study issues of open government and civil society organizations. I'm very happy that so many of you have found time today to join us. And before we start our presentation, I would like to give the floor to Muriel Poisson for the opening remarks.
So yeah, I wanted to thank also the colleagues from APREC for their support in organizing this event today. And I'm very happy that the colleagues from Open School are with us and Yuri today. That's very good news. And thanks also for the colleagues from the Donetsk oblast that are going also to intervene. And I'm also very much looking forward to their presentation and to their comments. So I'm going to have a very short introduction to give you some elements of context of the work that has been conducted by Oksana and Alexandra. So if we go next, Verena. So just to inform you, so that the institute I'm working on and for which this case study was carried out is called the IIEP, International Institute for Educational Planning. This is a specialized UNESCO institute whose mission is to develop the capacities of UNESCO member states in the area of planning and management, meaning that our main partner as part of our work are ministry people. We offer different types of activities at our institute, which is based in Paris. We provide training, we provide technical assistance work, and we also organize policy research. And this is part of our research that this case study was developed. For a number of years now, within this institute, about 20 years, in fact, we have been embarking on the topic of ethics and corruption in the education sector and try to document how to improve transparency, how to improve accountability in the education sector, how to promote public access to information, and how to fight, more specifically, corruption in the education sector. And among the most recent publications and research that we have been carried out on those issues, some of them are dealing with the issue of open school data. And in fact, what we'll be presenting today have to do with the issue of open school data, and also on open government, which is broader than the issue of open school data. And this is what we'll hear today from Oksana and from Alexandra. Just for your information, we have 3 offices. The main office, which is based in Paris, in France, but we have also an office in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, covering the whole of Latin America, and also one in Dakar, covering Senegal. So next, Verena. Yeah, so about 3 years ago now, we have started with a new research that is dealing with the issue of open government in the education sector. I know that several of you are experts in the anti-corruption arena or are OG open government experts, but still I think it's interesting for all of us to try to define exactly what we mean by open government, specifically within the education sector. And so here on the screen on the left, you find the definition that we give ourselves to the issue of open government. As you see, we define it as the opening up of government data, processes, decisions, and control mechanisms to public involvement and scrutiny with the view to ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education. So as you see, our definition goes beyond public access to information and open data. It involves all the management processes within the education sector, also control mechanisms, and not in terms only of public participation, but also public involvement, control of what's happening within the education sector, with a view at the end of the day to improve access, quality, equity, to have some kind of impact on the education sector. So within this framework, the major aim of the research that we have carried out within this framework is to promote more responsive, effective, and innovative educational planning with a focus on citizens' involvement. And so we have started a number of activities as part of this research, a literature review, which was in fact carried out by Oksana and Alexandra at the very beginning of this research, which is available and which has been published that you can access if you're interested. We have carried out also a global survey in about 50 different countries. If you can mute your mic, yeah, because everyone can hear the noise. We have launched 7 in-depth case studies, and part of it is the one of Ukraine. One of it is the one on Ukraine. We have also launched 2 thematic studies on the role of school management committees, and I'm sure the colleagues will also refer to this topic in the context of Ukraine. And in our case, we have tried to interrogate what can be the role of school management committees in the case of India and in the case of different countries from Africa, and how much they can help as part of this global reflection in terms of open government. Next. Now, just to give you an idea of the research questions that we have been documented as part of this research, the first one, which enabling or limiting factors one need to take into account regarding the effective implementation of open government initiatives in education. As we will hear, it's not enough to set up a platform, an online platform. You want really people to be able to use it and to have an impact on the system. Then there are different factors, internal, external, that you need to take into account, which are there. How do different stakeholders perceive the usefulness and impact of open government initiatives from a short, medium, and long-term perspective? We are hearing more and more of many different types of open government initiatives flourishing in different sectors, including education. But at the end of the day, what kind of impact do they really have? And what is the perceptions of it at different levels, central level, local level, school level, administration levels, users level. So this is also something that we have tried to document as part of this research. At the end of the day, and you see this is a third element that you have at the bottom on the left of your screen, how can open government in education contribute to better access, quality, or equity in education? Because at the end of the day, this is what we're interested in, not to provide access to information or to involve people for its own sake, but really in order at the end of the day to have some kind of impact on the system, and if so, what kind of impact and how it can be assessed, how it can be monitored. And finally, also, because as you've understood, our role is to provide support to ministries of education and governments, what kind of recommendations we can give also for central education authorities. We can hear you again. If you can mute your mic. And then at the end of the day, which specific measures can be taken to improve the design, implementation, and impact of open government initiatives in education, so that different kind of stakeholders from civil society, local education authorities, central education authorities that want to launch such initiatives, what specific measures that they can think about. Next. So this is in this context that we have launched 7 case studies, and the way we have selected those case studies was to try to prioritize different aspects of open government. And as you see on this table, we have identified...
Мне просто очень нравится сам персонаж этого Соло, поэтому я смотрел все сезоны. И там тоже фишка в том, что...
Вимкніть, будь ласка, мікрофон.
And so as you can see also in this table, so we have identified different domains and dimensions of open government, including open budget, open policy, open contracting, social audits, and to try to document exactly different ways open government can be implemented. And in fact, this one in Ukraine is not well placed in our table. It goes with open budget, and it should go also with open data. And you see the list of other countries that we have included as part of our research: Portugal, the US, Madagascar, Colombia, Ukraine, India, and Peru. So the colleagues will tell you exactly why they decided at the level of Ukraine to focus on the open school platform. From our international perspective, the idea was to focus on open budgeting. That's the next one, Verena, next slide. Yeah, to focus on open budgeting at the very top. Use of ICTs. There is a very interesting use of ICTs and online platform, as you will hear from the colleagues. Also interesting capacity of civil society to mobilize local actors. And finally, the importance of parental contribution to school funding, which is a key issue in Ukraine, but which is also a key issue in many different countries and also in other regions of the world. And so hence the decisions to focus on this specific interesting initiative of the open school platform in Ukraine. And I will finish here because, again, the authors will present better than myself the methodology that they have been using. Next, Verena, next slide. So just to give you just some key information, more or less, we use the same methodology for the different case studies that we have launched in different countries, using secondary data, so existing documentation, but also organizing semi-structured interviews at different levels of the systems, from the central down to level, plus a number of quantitative questionnaires that have been distributed at country level. More or less, it was about 250 from one country to the other. It could be a bit less, including with the difficulty to collect some of them with the beginning of the pandemic in different states. But that's the way we proceeded with this kind of combination between qualitative and quantitative approach. And so I'm going to end up here. Verena, you can close. Yeah, thanks a lot to the PowerPoint. And so I hand it over to Oksana and Alexandra to give you more details about the work that they have been carrying out for us. Thanks to the two of you.
Thank you very much, Muriel. It was our pleasure to be part of this project. І зараз я передам слово Оксані Гус, яка представить контекст нашого дослідження.
The context of our research. Good afternoon, dear participants. It's a great pleasure for us to see you joining us today. We hope for very fruitful cooperation and discussion after today's presentation. So concerning the context, the majority of us, I can see in our audience, come from Ukraine. So this context is very well familiar to you. At the same time, for the information of some of our international guests, we will repeat what the specificity of Ukrainian context is concerning this case study and open budgeting for Ukraine. First of all, the decentralization reform in Ukraine referred to school education, and the key role and the responsibility for the support of schools now was shifted to local authorities, which relates to funding, school networks, salaries for the teaching staff are funded from the state budget. At the same time, local governments maintain and support schools. At the same time, since 2011, Ukraine has become an active partner of the international network or the international partnership called Open Government. What does it mean? It means that the countries which are part of this partnership are obliged to provide access to public information. They assume responsibility for openness. And after the revolution of dignity, this was one of the requirements of the general public in the context of the widespread rampant corruption in Ukraine to gain greater access and transparency with regard to funding, which related not only to schools, but the request for public finance overall for the all Ukrainian economic and social sectors. In the framework of this partnership, Ukraine is very active and it is implementing a lot of technologies, and the government of Ukraine, the Ministry of Digital Transformation, in particular, has been implementing a lot of different initiatives on open data. In the context of this open data, they're opening up data about financing of school education and educational sector. In parallel with that, we have also had special legislation in the form of the law on education of Ukraine concerning the transparency of school institutions. So there is a requirement for financial transparency, while at the same time there is no specific information given concerning how this transparency should be ensured. So these are the three specific points along the lines of which our study took place and was undertaken in Ukraine. Now, concerning school financing context, where do we have issues? Or rather, the logical problem or issue, where does it stem from? On the one hand, we may see the growing expenditure on public education from the public budget, and from about 6%, it has increased to nearly 17% of the budget of the GDP. And some of the small communities spend up to 80% of their small budgets for schooling. This relates not to big towns or cities, but to small communities. And at the same time, this 80% is not enough to adequately support and maintain educational institutions. Therefore, one of the widespread practices is for parents to raise donations, funds. We had different interviews held, and you may see from them that 90% of parents, according to the polls, contribute money as donations, and more than half of this money, 51%, is contributed without any accounts, without any reporting, without any transparency or accountability concerning where the money goes to. It does not necessarily mean that this money goes for corruption purposes, but it simply speaks in favor of the fact that we don't have any processes of documenting or recording what happens to this funding. In Kherson, in the south of Ukraine, parental financing reaches 16.5 million hryvnias. And here we can see another issue, which is about the subvention allocated by the government, which goes underused, and it's about the same amount. So it's the inefficiency of appropriating budgeting allocated by the stand fund. So here we may see different risks, corruption risks, and ineffective application of funds. Different studies, different polls and surveys attest to the fact that, unfortunately, corruption is endemic in Ukraine, and 10% of those that gave bribes, they gave bribes at schools. This was according to Elko Kucherev special survey that was back in 2017, and 10% of those involved in that survey confirmed that they had given bribes. We also have mismanagement of parental donations, and this is a confirmation provided by the OECD. Most of the funding goes in cash. So if it's in non-cash funds, then it's much easier to trace such money rather than when it is submitted in cash funds. As I have said before, corruption risks are not the only issue at stake. Another issue is inefficient appropriation of funds, application of funds. And as I have identified, there is a very high amount which is unfortunately left without being appropriated by the public institutions in the school sector. At schools, we were also able to see all through our studies and also via reading different publications, literature and analysis undertaken in the sector, that predominantly people want just to quench fire. That is to say, there is a gap and they want to bridge the gap. Instead of planning ahead of time, planning such expenditures ahead of time, because we know that buildings, maintenance and repair of school buildings is something that needs to be pre-planned. Along with that, we also have a big problem, or complication rather, technical complication of reporting, financial reporting, because a lot of schools do not enjoy financial autonomy. And this financial reporting is done along with the departments of education, the school founders. And sometimes this complicates the whole process of reporting and accounting. What are some of the technical solutions that have become possible with the introduction of information communication technologies, ECTs? Most of the time, this is initiated by the civil society, but not always. Now we have an opportunity to make financing more transparent via different platforms, online platforms. And in Ukraine, we have several such platforms or opportunities. It's not only the Open School, but also EduPay. You may know that they enable you to donate funds. That is to say, the parents contribute their donations not in cash funds, but via this electronic platform, and it's possible to monitor the appropriation of these funds. Or PayWatch. It's possible to ensure transparent budgets, but we don't have any information about donations on this platform. And in some towns, such as Bilatsekla near Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, we also have municipal portals that also provide information about the financing of schools. So how is Open School different from the other platforms? It's much larger. It encompasses several components that do not just provide you with information about public or parental donations, but along with that, you also have an opportunity to monitor the needs as well as see how these needs are met. It's also possible to transmit money and also report for the donations and donor funds. And at this point, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Andriy, who is co-founder of this platform, and for him to share about the specificity of this platform, where it is applied, and perhaps at what stage this platform is at the moment. Good afternoon. Thank you for this invitation and for the work undertaken. My name is Yuri Antushchuk. We have done a lot of work on educational institutions, and it will be very, very important at this point to repeat our main idea, which we invested in the creation and the establishment planning, designing of this system, the system called Open School, which appeared for a specific reason. The data that you provided for the years 2017 and 2018, they clearly attest to the fact that something is wrong about how funds have been allocated recently. So we began with focus groups. Focus groups focusing on parents, and we were primarily interested in finding out what they were dissatisfied with and where they saw the solution to the problem. This was far way back in 2016. It was in Kherson at the local level. Then several organizations joined their efforts and created this informal coalition. And the first thing we were going to undertake was to make the process more transparent, the process of receiving and appropriation of donations, especially charitable funds. because this charitable fund sometimes are really vast. This was back in 2016, now we are in 2021, and nothing much has changed, in fact, in terms of the digits of the funding. Due to the pandemic over the last year, these donations were smaller, but things remain the same. We continue to be in touch with a great number of parents, school principals, not only located in towns, but also in villages and local territorial community. And our task remains the same. First of all, to make the process of receiving such charitable funds, this process of receiving that more transparent, made it in a more unified way so that everybody would see how this information goes for first school, per region, how much money is used for various needs, because as our monitoring attested, monitoring of school websites, how different is educational establishments reported to the Ministry of Education and Science. Some schools did it in the way that they could. Sometimes there were Excel spreadsheets, some of them used some scanned copies, sometimes it was information that was absolutely impossible to make out, so they reported in a variety of ways. And our task was not only to make this process transparent, but also unified, accessible and understandable, comprehensible, because in fact the recommendations were not issued by the Ministry of Education and Science. And this presented us with a certain difficulty, because back in 2017, everyone was told to have their websites and to report for several years. And of course, the schools tried to do that in several months. And the first thing that we had was this unified form of reporting for charitable funds, where we also could attach scanned copies of invoices, contracts, agreements, where different needs could also be publicized. Because we were coming from the fact that people, when they contribute donations, they have a certain need in mind. And that's something that needs to be publicized in the first place. And then, should we speak about only then should we speak about a lack of funding from the local public authorities. So we have the publication of the needs of different educational facilities. So this is the list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., certain amounts in order to meet those needs. And then the parents may see whether or not these needs require meeting. And as the system was developing, and as we were communicating with different organizations, different educational institutions, and our international partners, our system received new functionality. And as of today, it's a more comprehensive one, and it allows us to report in a more comprehensive way, as well as to inform users, first of all, parents, and also it's a tool for making decisions. Why? Because first of all, it's a possibility to publicize the needs of educational institutions, possibility to reflect how different needs are financed and met. And at the same time, you can see also what charitable funds in the form of goods, services, or funds, how this is provided, and you can compare it region by region, school by school, institution by institution. It's also possible to get information through requests. And now you can publicize virtually everything that relates to Article 30 of the law on education. Then charitable organizations log on this platform at any time of day or night, and they may see what needs are there, which needs have been supported with the help of public funding, what support has been obtained by charitable organizations and what form this support has been given, whether or not these institutions try to meet these needs with the help of public funding, whether or not these public educational institutions submitted requests for public funding, and further studies can be undertaken. So this is the functionality that the system affords now. And of course, there are some complications with regard to the operability and operation of the system. We will talk about it a bit later, because there are a lot of components that needs to be talked through, both by the parents and the principals of schools, and for the stakeholders such as donors, everybody experiences certain difficulties, but the system has been constructed in a way that if an educational institution wants it to happen, if the Department of Education wants to have it, then they may have exhaustive reports on financial information in a very comprehensible format for their audiences, not only for the parents, I mean, but for businesses in particular and other possible stakeholders. Therefore, now this possibility is available. Another issue is how this instrument is being used. Thank you very much, Mr. Yuri, for this brief overview of the system called Open School. And to sum up, we see the 4 points which the system had, at least as of 2019. It's important to highlight it because this was the year when we did our studies. And now I begin to launch into the presentation of our studies, our findings, and the analysis. So first, let me point out how the study was undertaken. We did an overview of secondary sources in order to understand better the context for open school platform implementation. We also conducted interviews with the founders of the system in order to understand how the system operates, and we are very grateful for the cooperation with Mr. Yuri for taking his time to explain it all to us in great detail. We also held interviews at different levels of management and government because we believe that functionality of any open data system needs to be understood in the comprehensive complex of educational system management. And we had such 24 different semi-structured interviews with the representatives of the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Finance, the agency that provides for ensuring quality of educational processes. We also talked with principals, school principals, with the heads of educational departments and public organizations in towns that we set for our study. And here I would like to take this opportunity to thank those individuals who are with us here today. We thank you for your collaboration, that you allowed us to communicate with you, with the schools, with pupils and teachers as well as parents. We really appreciate the support. So how did we choose? How did we make our choices? At the point of choosing the towns in order to launch into more detailed studies, especially open school implementation, Open School was at that time already spread to 13 regions in Ukraine, and our goal was to select the regions, or at least the region, where there was the greatest variety for the implementation of the system. As we showed, there are 4 different ways of how to apply the system. For instance, just to show budgeting information, which is automatically generated with the help of public authorities because they submit information, or to undertake certain steps in order to report for donations, charitable, organizational activities. So we wanted to see a region where there was the greatest variety, diversity of open school platform implementation. And by way of comparison and selecting different regions of how schools were applying this system, finally, we chose Donetsk region. Please turn off your microphone. Those of you who have your microphones on, unmute them, please. I cannot see who that is, from Druzhkivka somewhere. Mute your microphone, please. So we selected 3 towns, Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinivka, and in these 3 towns we held 12 focus groups, and we involved all possible stakeholders. We spoke to teachers, parents, administrators for open schools, and principals. We also sent surveys and questionnaires to about 200 parents and teachers, as well as principals from 12 schools, and we could process the answer of 97 parents and 75 teachers at 13 schools. And we conducted this in October 2019. Based on the conversations with the key stakeholders and surveys, we managed to construe a more or less efficient way of how Open School platform was implemented. And here I would like to support what Yuri has previously said. A very important aspect was that the civil society actively involved parents and NGOs. They sent their request for the transparency of holding school financing reporting. There were a lot of, previously there had been sent a lot of complaints that were sent to the local departments of education that had come from different towns and cities and local communities. And at the political level, this also had to vouch support. And at that time, elections were being held in one of the towns, and the complaints of the parents reached such a head that local political candidates were beginning to include this into their political agendas, and they said, we need to stem parental donations from happening. And this, they made it one of their electoral promises. And I should say that this helped, but in other towns where this wasn't happening, open school was still being implemented and rather successfully. Critical in this sense was the role played by the departments of education, because the departments of education facilitated the process of maintaining this platform at the level of local governments, local municipalities. When the founders of Open School and local administrations signed memoranda on collaboration, this was an important step to show that the parties were ready and poised to cooperate and to implement Open School. No less important was the role played by the principals of schools, because in fact, they became the implementers and the key users of the system when planning their budgets, when reporting to the departments of education, when solving important, making decisions about important sectors of their activities, like administering Open School on the basis of their schools. And no less important were administrators of Open School on the basis of schools. Most of the time, these were informatics teachers or computer science teachers or assistants to administrators of schools. And this was an extra duty incumbent on them to report on Open School implementation within their schools. So the civil society was one of the most active actors for the Open School to be launched. We also surveyed school teachers, and it should be noted that parents, very few parents, basically said that in some way they were involved in the implementation of Open School, but the teachers, on the contrary, as you can see from the graph, the more than half of the surveyed said that they were involved in the implementation. A large stake of them controlled the implementation of the system, and part of the survey said that they implemented certain amendments to the functionality of Open School within their schools. And this process of implementation also shows to us how important three components were and are for any system of involvement. So first of all, this civil society request because of the complaints. But no less important was the fact that at this point was a lot of communication and collaboration. The civil community, the administration of schools, and departments of education were trying to find the points of compromise of how to apply Open School and how to promote it further. For instance, there was an interesting case, as it was shared with us during one of the interviews, when one of the NGOs simply stood forward and would help parents and explain to parents how this Open School system can be implemented, applied by them, or they also provided training sessions provided by Union Fund and some other NGOs for the teaching staff, and also presentations made specially targeting parents and some more creative events and functions. Another interesting point was the example of cooperation. There was another interesting point of this cooperation when NGOs were helping principals to write official requests for budgeting, for the needs, for meeting the needs of their schools, and they used Open School as a platform in order to submit public requests to the departments of education. So this was the point of collaboration in order to ensure the stability of this system at work. And as I said, it also helps enormously if we vouch the support of the supreme authorities in towns and cities. For instance, in one of the towns where we were doing our research has helped a lot because the city of town authorities said, okay, we will monitor the needs of Open School platform because this will enable us to plan for schooling expenditures for the following year. At least for them, for the term of office of that regional administration, those municipal authorities, this was really helpful for them. And the surveyed, I mean, both parents and teachers, they appreciated these points: good cooperation, the trust between the participants and stakeholders, commitments of both school administrations and the whole community, that is to say, the general public. They appreciated that as the factor that allows such systems as Open School to achieve their goals that they set for themselves. It's also important to speak about challenges, and we decided to focus on two types of challenges. It's sustainability, and another type of challenges, its unforeseeable consequences, which must also be taken into account when planning. Concerning sustainability, one of the most repeated recurrent topic reflected by both principals and administrators and parents was understanding Open School as an supplementary duty workload, which unfortunately was not remunerated, in particular for the administrators who would have to be responsible for all of the reporting, because sometimes they calculated that would take up to 4 hours per week of extra workload. Also, during the implementation of Open School, it is being implemented at this time when several more educational reforms are running in Ukraine. For instance, electronic date books are being implemented, electronic reports concerning the assessment of educational quality. Paper reporting is still required by the Minister of Education and Science. Therefore, in a way, Open School was perceived as duplication of reporting operations. And it should be noted that our conclusion is that Open School is not a duplication because it shows this data in another format. It's easy to read, automatically read, and identified from open public data resources. It's easily comparable. And in order to show this difference, of course, it needs more work in order to persuade stakeholders that this is not duplication. And we need to think about how perhaps other parts of reporting should be eliminated. Another recurrent topic was that it's still difficult, in particular for the administrators to maintain the system, and they require technical assistance. And they would say, we want a regional administrator to whom we would like to raise these issues. And at the point when we were doing our research, the feedback between Open School and stakeholders most of the time was done in a very informal way. People would just telephone each other asking what to do. So this means a lot of extra time, extra efforts of all of the people involved in this process. This, of course, stimulates trust and the development of personal networking, but at the same time, you should understand that this is also a resource and pecuniary resource. So it's necessary to think about a system of feedback that needs to be fed in the Open School. Also, they spoke about the lack of technical skills by the users because people in many ways are not used to doing things electronically. And in many ways, it's also a lack of proper equipment of both at home and at school. Besides, another difficulty we were able to witness, sometimes we were under the impression that the Union Fund and Druzhkivka public organization, they came to parents, they infused the parents, everybody was interested, but then the attention unfortunately declined because the people tend to do their business in particular when they don't see the evidence of applying this open school and the successful academic performance of their children, or perhaps the maintenance of the school buildings where children they get their schooling. Another obstacle is in the fact when a school itself cannot report, cannot plan better and appropriate its funds because the accounting offices are centralized. This complicates the process because the reporting itself and auditing itself is really complicated, especially when we talk about donations. And here, we need to raise this issue not at the level of the departments of education, but to the whole centralized level of financial reporting. And secondly, this is an extra workload for accountants at schools. These are challenges, and we saw some examples in our interviews when people managed these challenges themselves. For instance, they would sit down, some of the active parents would put their heads together in order to see how the system operates, or active mothers would sit next to the administrators in order to see how to upload different information or download. So this support by the administrators and the parents is critical in order to overcome these challenges. But with regard to financial autonomy and support, this all requires a more systemic approach, systemic budgeting, and this involves local administrations and perhaps the level of central authorities. And this is something that I would like us to discuss today. The challenges that parents and teachers see about the implementation of the system are different. Parents and teachers were very positive about the system and the goals that it sets and reaches for itself. They spoke about the lack of motivation, lack of funding, and indifference on behalf of the parents. In other words, it means that lack of motivation is when there is extra workload, something that teachers in particular spoke about. Talking about feedback, something else that needs to be pointed out, quite a lot of feedback is done at a personal level at school. We have the community at schools. This is what communication is all about. And at the same time, there is a challenge. It's time consuming and it's laborious. Electronic feedback is also done, and parents are not very well aware of how they can present this feedback electronically. And what we also mentioned with regard to unforeseeable consequences and predictable consequences. First is the risks of mitigating or reducing funding by parents. So this is something that was emphasized by both parents and school administrations. They saw a risk in that. If local authorities refuse point blank and they publicly say that we are not going to raise any donations from parents, a situation may occur when neither local nor executive budgeting will be enough to cover the local needs. And at the same time, parents who would raise these donations, they would simply violate the norms, and this poses a risk. Also, something that relates not only to open school, but to the majority of these involvement platforms relates to the fact that misunderstandings or lack of understanding may intensify due to the fact that, as one of our partners during interviews said, we're all different people, we all see education in different ways, how it must be funded. And if we involve a great number of stakeholders, this results in a great deal of chaos. Therefore, facilitation plays a great deal of importance. Negotiations, discussions, opportunity to hear different opinions in order to arrive at a consensus. Point 3 rather relates not to open school, but to the majority of what parents cover with their donations when they decide to repair walls, for instance. And as it was told to me during one of the interviews held in Kiev at the level of the national public organizations, there were some situations when parents would repair a wall year in and year out, and the wall collapsed eventually, and it turned out that there was a problem with the foundation of the wall. So sometimes parents get involved, but there is no professional oversight undertaken, and therefore it results in the loss of financial resources. So parents also need to be involved in a clever, intelligent way. Some users also told us that they were not sure, they were fearful of remitting money online with the help of bank cards. But I'm sure that via proper communication, such fears must be mitigated and should be mitigated. Now I would like to give the floor to Oksana for her to pick up on the presentation. If we reflect on the challenges, we must always be able to work out strategies to find improvements and solutions to these challenges. If we see that innovations are very promising as in case of open school, because the people that implement this platform with whom we interacted, who we interviewed, they saw a very high potential in this platform. And therefore, they invested both their time and efforts in the implementation. For the strategies of implementation and improvement, we see two aspects. First, standardizing managerial routine on reporting and financial transparency assurance. Firstly, at the level of the departments of education, there is a possibility via the data received to plan expenditures ahead, in advance. If we plan beforehand on the basis of the knowledge of the previous years, as it was done at one of the communities, then this platform really holds a great deal of potential in order to establish these processes of forward planning. Secondly, using Open School, this platform is a very good foundation for the communication between school principals and departments of education. Why is it important? In order to avoid the situations when someone may say, I thought that they would think, and they would think that I know, and vice versa, because via this platform, communication is done not at a personal level, but at the non-personal, subjective level concerning the needs. And when principals vouch the support of the parents concerning the meeting of the needs, whether toilet paper is necessary, whether it's necessary to repair windows, and when they communicate it in the form of a request to be financed by the departments of education. And along with that, the information comes not from the principal of the school personally, because sometimes we are under the impression that we personally come to departments of education asking them for finance and financial support, and this creates personal rapport, personal relations, just because we are asking so kindly. All of this is to do with communication and culture, but this platform allows us to mitigate this to subjective communication concerning on the basis of needs without any personal relations involvement, and this is a very important aspect. Thirdly, it's necessary to establish very clear procedure and responsibility for the technical support. When schools understand that they need to report for funding, then time needs to be allocated to this reporting. They allocate time to that, And in order to make this process more efficient, and not only on paper, sometimes it's worth investing more time and make a designated person responsible and definitely remunerate these people for the number of hours that these people undertake in order to submit this reporting, in order for electronic reporting to become a routine mode of reporting. Fourthly, it's necessary to think of financing open school platform from public sources, from public municipalities that would ensure sustainability, because from our interviews we're able to see that time costs are not that high. If you calculate it all properly, then we can at least launch into a discussion concerning what financing it requires and how this financing should be maintained. And fifthly, lastly, paper reporting needs to be revised so that administrators or the people that are in charge of financial reporting should not duplicate the same, they should avoid duplication. So the second point for us, from our perspective, that needs to be improved, it's improvement of communication with all interested stakeholders. Just as Alexander has mentioned, cooperation and collaboration of different key stakeholders was critical for sustainable, successful implementation of Open School. In the towns where the platform has become operational and successful, we have been able to see the success of cooperational triangle where the local civil society and school administrators and public authorities were engaged in successful communication. Definitely, funding efforts and time need to be allocated in order to inform parents concerning the benefits gained from application of this platform, because most of the time they say, well, parents do not apply the system. But unless there is proper information, there will not be proper applications. Secondly, we need to creatively incentivize the application of this platform by schools at the level of departments of education, maybe by introducing the rating of open schools or perhaps festivals of openness. And thirdly, we need to continue to involve principals, responsible administrators to continue developing the system so that they have the feeling of ownership. That it's not only the Union Fund that created and established this platform, the owners of this platform, but this platform is a product of ownership by the schools. Regardless of these challenges and gaps that require improvements, Open School as a platform, via the interviews, still, as we were able to see, that still enabled schools to address and handle different problems. And four of them we would like once again to stress openness of financing schools, because openness and transparency introduces clarity and diminishes suspicions concerning corruption on behalf of school administrations, because as I said right from the very beginning, corruption is not always present where people suspect it to be available. And at the same time, the public feel, we don't see any accountability. That means money is misappropriated. But transparency is the most effective means of mitigating such suspicions and raising trust among parents and teachers and all involved stakeholders in the educational sector. Secondly, improving communication between schools and departments of education. Just as I said, we need to avoid situations when somebody thinks, I thought they would think, and they would think that I knew that. So people need to give more thinking concerning the needs of schools, and they need to think more about how these needs of schools must be financed and met. Next, data needs to be submitted concerning the expenditures for covering the needs of schools and pre-planning for that. And lastly, it's fostering trust via the process of collaboration between all of the stakeholders. If we take one more step up open government as an idea, as a concept. If we extrapolate from open budgets and move to the concept of open government as such as a way to do management at the level of towns, cities, or even management at the level of the countries, we begin to observe a certain shift in culture, in interrogation between the citizens and the country authorities. That is to say, there is a shift in the paradigm from hierarchical relations to the culture of joint creation and accountability. We're talking about the fact that principals and directorates of education, they are not a hierarchy, but this is a partnership which involves participation of parents and perhaps even pupils and NGOs, because we all have limited resources. And in order to improve the situation, if we want to do it all together in partnership, jointly, we can always reach very fine solutions. That is to say, from formal hierarchy, we move on to cooperation. And another important shift of paradigm and culture is being aware of the fact that public funding is our joint funds. So parents need to realize that they have a legitimate request to cover expenses, financial expenses from public authorities. And therefore, these informal solutions of parental donations, and especially as it was done during the Soviet Union times, that along with the public authorities, you would also have to find sources and find informal solutions to problems and exhaust perhaps your own funds in order to obtain what basically legitimately belongs to the general public, because the budgets belong to the local communities, and the local communities have every right to send requests for these budgets without feeling that we owe it. And fourthly, in relations between parents, sometimes raising donations causes situations of bullying, exacerbating personal relations. When people begin to make everyone equal because everybody submits money, so should you. Transparent financing and respective culture of financial management, which open school enhances, helps to mitigate this bullying and avoid these situations and prevent them from happening. On our behalf, that's all. We wrap up our presentation, but thank you very much for all of the data you presented to us. And I would like to give the floor to our guests, who were also very actively involved in our study, in our research, for you to hear their position. Alexandra, the floor is yours. Thank you, Oksana. First of all, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Oksana Lazebnik, who is the head of the Department of Education at Druzhkivka local municipality, to hear her reflections from her experience of what is necessary in order to engage all of the stakeholders in the educational sector. But please, you are also provide your comments on everything that you have heard concerning today's presentation. Good afternoon, dear participants of today's conference. Why? In October 2017, we signed this memorandum on cooperation with the Union Fund, because, well, we had a very favorable, conducive situation. Unfortunately, there had been a lot of complaints, and there was also the willingness expressed by the local authorities, the mayor, to resolve the issue of parental donations, and the Department of Education and Public Organization, the representative of that is Svetlana Ogadjanyan. She was interested in that, and we signed this memorandum in 2018. And Since 2019, we have been implementing Open School. I would like to thank Yuri Onishchuk for his support, for training our administrators. And I would like to say that this system enables administrators and administrations to be compliant with the law on public information, on publicizing information on public donations, to be more transparent, to be more contemporary. Along with that, it streamlines the process of reporting to the communities concerning obtaining and appropriation of budget and extra budgeting resources. There is also a mobile application on this system. It's possible to operate the system with the help of our mobile telephones, and parents can very conveniently learn the needs of the educational institutions, where and how these educational institutions apply donations and budgeting allocated by public authorities. It also enables us to publish photographs, something that parents will immediately be able to see that the funding is not misappropriated and not embezzled. If we talk about risks, I would like to say a few things about risks, something that we have faced with. In our Department of Education, there are 3 educational institutions which are legal entities. However, they don't have their own financial balance, and they are audited by the centralized accounting department. That is to say, they can post their data, but no funding will be allocated to these institutions because, once again, the financial auditing is done centrally by the Department of Education. Another big risk is when parents raise their donations, money was in a cash form in parental committees, and when necessary, the principal of a school could approach his parental committees and they could immediately go to the store and obtain goods or services. Whereas today, funds go to special accounts, and it's possible to immediately apply this funding as you wish. But when we were implementing Open School, the local council, with the help of the local mayor, allocated funds to prepare for the following educational year. And at that point, it was about 3 million Ukrainian hryvnias for preschool and secondary school institutions. There was a lot of special outreach done for the parents, for principals of schools. And from my perspective, here 3 components matter: the general public, authorities, and educational institutions. Once they unite, if they find common understanding, then Open School, from my perspective, is very much to my liking. It really appeals to me because the outputs are the following. For the year 2019, with regard to complaints, there were 10 to 15 complaints. There used to be 10 to 15 complaints. Now, in 2019, there were only 7 complaints, and nowadays we don't have any complaints issued by the parents concerning parental donations. Thank you very much, Ms. Svetlana, for sharing your experience. And just as Ms. Svetlana has mentioned the role of the NGO called the Country of Opportunities, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Svetlana Agadjanyan, the representative of this NGO. Dear colleagues, I'm very happy to welcome you. I'll try to be brief in order to make sure people are not tired, because we have been working for more than 1 hour now, but let me focus on your attention on the fact that on our takeaways, on our experience. We also obtained complaints issued by parents. They would think there were corruption interests involved, and they would say that there were duplications, that some things were financed from local budgets, and people couldn't comprehend whether or not the windows were installed in schools with parental funding or with public funding. But when we are in constant contact with the public authorities, with Yuri Onishchuk, with his associates of Open School, we immediately realized how we could proceed, just as Ms. Svetlana has previously said. For 4 years, we had been working with the Department of Education with several schools, and we involved extra budgeting. We wrote projects, implemented initiatives for several educational institutions, and not only focusing on partnership school, where all of our initiatives spread forth from, but we were confronted with human elements, because both parents and schools understood that we would take care of them and we would continue our activities systematically and comprehensively. And since 2019, we have enhanced the activities done by the local authorities. We conducted the local fundraising campaign, and we had a campaign called The Community on the Way to Our Dream. We taught different fundraising activities to parents and to schools. And together with NIU Druzhkivka, we raised thousands of hryvnias and more than 100,000 of hryvnias. This was the money donated. So schools, preschool educational facilities had gifts. This was about 10,000 per every educational facility, and we have 23 educational facilities, so that means 230,000 hryvnias were allocated as additional funds as a way of gifts. But we also saw a lot of populism on behalf of the parents. Unfortunately, I have to mention that, because when we began to engage in a conversation about their personal responsibility and involvement in this process, they would say to us, your team is wonderful, you can handle it perfectly, keep on doing it. So they just wanted to push the buck on our team, on the Department of Education in particular. And we said, colleagues, you know how to write budgets. You have such certain networking contacts and partnership in our person, and we can recommend you as reliable partners who are prepared for transparency. Please go ahead and engage in that. Do not just make us incumbent. So with our colleagues, we also raised issues of either establishing a charitable fund or a separate NGO that would take care of these specific issues. Ms. Svetlana may remember the beginning of 2020 when we raised this, the necessity of systemic work. Then this communication was channeled into an perhaps a specially designated establishment of a certain agency who would represent the interests of all of the educational facilities in a centralized way, because as of today, this is a very difficult routine job to administer all of these projects. And certainly, they would still say to us that there were some things that we lack, and why do we keep working less in 2020 with these issues? We want parents to become ambassadors of this issue, to be ready, to be proactive, and to say, please teach us. We want to take care of all of the schools, because most of the time they just want to speak about their local interests instead. And before they engage in the work, they immediately talk about internal censorship inside of them. I am a mother myself. Still, I can communicate and I can build this communication openly, and I can openly engage with public authorities, but others are afraid. They want to hide behind someone else's backs. Unfortunately, we face it quite often, pushing them up. But this is the reality as of today. Respectively, NGOs are a promising reality and future, but unfortunately, in the 3 years, we haven't been able to see this open school as a tool that parents would be able to exercise themselves, would be willing to exercise themselves. It's true. Thank you very much, Ms. Svetlana, for your comments. In particular, in the context of being open government, partnership is only possible when all involved stakeholders remain interested. Partnership may not be involved or maintained when there is only an NGO. One NGO. Mr. Andriy, maybe you would like to comment on the results of our study and say a few things concerning what has changed since 2019. Maybe there are some other examples of applying open school in a partnership with someone else. Thank you. I can talk for a very long time. You can even launch a separate podcast and I will engage in talking because I very well understand parents, principals, schools, departments of education. There are issues at different levels. We have heard this in different towns and cities across the full board of Ukraine, wherever we made our presentations, and people will always ask us who will remunerate us for publicizing this information. We publicize it anyway. But when the issue arises, please make a comparable table, comparative table, or give an example of comparisons of how it was last year and what is procured this year, or some problematic points and needs, bottlenecks. It was immediately very difficult to do it at once. And on behalf of parents, we also heard we are not ready to make it public. Why should we report for for the donations that we raised? This was our personal decision. So the process of receiving charitable donations still remains for educational institutions, and everybody keeps saying this is unacceptable on the one hand, whilst on the other hand, they do require these donations. But let me elaborate more on how changes were taking place, because I mean, the changes in the context of the pandemic, how the application of the system was undergoing changes and how it's happening now. Before our meeting, I took some points of statistics, the number of views of our system by different educational institutions that belong to our system. We have more than 700 educational institutions. Unfortunately, not all of them report. In their profiles, not all educational institutions do that, and we've spoken today about why. And in November 2019 and 2020, we had about 20 entries and reviews of different pages by different educational facilities of the appropriation of different funds, whether they were charitable or public ones. Then in November 2020, during the quarantine time, and a lot of schools began to work remotely and began to work online. This number of 20,000 reviews declined to 2,000 reviews of views. So people basically were involved in remote learning, and how much money was donated and how this money was appropriated was not a big deal for them, because they were more involved in the issues of building conditions for their children's remote education. Therefore, these days, donations are less for educational institutions. Regardless of that, different departments of education keep calling us and write to us concerning how they can connect to the system. For example, a few months ago, I don't remember when exactly, but they telephoned us from the west of Ukraine, from Ivano-Frankivsk, the Department of Education, because they wanted a comprehensive connection to our platform, and separate institutions also connected us, got in contact with us from Donetsk, the Department of Education. And I even managed to go to Donetsk in the west of Ukraine several times in order to do some training and to sign a memorandum on cooperation with the Department of Education. So this process is moving along. Principals of schools who wanted to apply the system in its full range, not just for reporting. They are not only talking about reporting, but communication, about building rapport and trust, about diminishing this trust, this tension which usually arises between parents and teachers. We're talking here about new opportunities for educational facilities that may not even have their own websites, then can take advantage of our system, and they can use our system and have their own website here. More than 52% of schools in Ukraine don't have their own websites. This is not my statistics, but the statistics issued by the Ministry of Education and Science. Therefore, our platform is an opportunity for educational institutions to improve this communication and to involve extra funding. But we cannot be the body that exercises or controls the appropriation and operation of the system. With the help of our international partners, with the help of EU anti-corruption initiative in particular, we were able to finalize the system and include in its functionality something that a lot of principals and parents had been telling us about throughout several years in our meetings with them. It's something that you mentioned. People need to understand that people need to have a certain leverage. They need to be able to provide some recommendations on improving the system. And we can implement these recommendations. And secondly, now Microsoft has provided us with a functionality to place our platform in the cloud environment without involving any extra funding. We have our cloud functionality maintained, because you should understand, when you have monthly 20,000 views and then thousands and thousands of scanned copies of agreements, invoices, financial reports, and everything is posted on our platform. It's a huge volume on the computer platform, and we require these cloud opportunities in order to withstand all of this kind of workload. On the other hand, we cannot control educational institutions, and if departments of education or local governmental authorities express their initiatives and they want other educational institutions to connect to our systems, that's wonderful. If they want us to provide them with video lessons or to consult them and to provide them with technical assistance, that's brilliant. But later on, it is incumbent on the schools to maintain. Schools themselves, not even the departments of education, are responsible, and local authorities, in a way, may be controlling or monitoring bodies to trace the process of reporting, but the main burden is incumbent on educational institutions. And we understand that sometimes they have a lack of financing, or they don't know how to source this financing. They simply don't know how to involve additional financing in order to recompense teachers of computer science for the work hours, for the hours of work to maintain the system. I could speak and speak, but I would like to put a stop to it, because there are probably some other questions that we need to raise. I would like to ask extra 5 minutes, if I may, for questions from the audience, in order to make sure that your questions also get answered. Ms. Natalia Slobodanyuk in the chat box raised a very important issue. Ms. Natalia, perhaps you would like to voice your question. Yes, I can do that. Yes, you're welcome. I thought I wouldn't be able to do that, therefore I wrote in the chat box. The question is, and my video is on, wonderful. The question is, the basic problem, the main problem, is raising funds in the parental community. Clearly defined circle these are the parents of the pupils, and the pupils are the ones that make parents, as we say, hostages, turn their parents into hostages. Therefore, parents are afraid not to donate. This is illegal on the one hand, and on the other hand, it creates situations, makes for situations that may result in rebellions or mutinies. Therefore, certain measures need to be undertaken in order to stem such parental contributions and donations. So this button of Open School, once I log on Open School, I immediately see this button without any registration. I can press this button without any need, without indication by the head of the particular principal of the school. I can immediately remit money to the bank account of my educational institution. I think this is something that parents need to be taught. We need to think of a very simple way to communicate that to the parents in order to stop these parental contributions. But once again, donors and charitable organizations, if they want to, if they log on the system, they can immediately transmit their money to local bank accounts, because we need to also widen the circle of charitable organizations so that the parents understand that they are not the charity organization, not the father, not the mother, but even non-members of the community can contribute to these charitable causes. So I believe this button should be accessible to the wider circle of people, and it should be very visible on the site, on the homepage, desirably. And then we can teach parents and all of the stakeholders. And if we have an agreement with the administration, I think I can immediately come to parent-teacher meeting, and I can immediately teach parents to get out their smartphones or mobile phones and to show them where this button is. And during this parent-teacher meeting, if they wish, they can immediately rewire money, and thus develop this certain skill immediately at these parent-teacher meetings. And if 1, 2, 3 people do that, this habit will be spread further. Thank you, Ms. Natalia. Ms. Svetlana, you wanted to say something? Yes, as a follow-up, I would also like to raise another deep issue. Throughout the systemic interaction with schools and parents, we saw that parents do not perceive schools as partners. There's a lot of competition. They compete for rates in ZNO, in academic Olympics, and they say, why on earth, when we take care of our school graduate needs, our parent needs, must we consider school needs as one systemic need? This was raised in collaboration with one of the charitable organizations, and we tried to persuade them that we are one community, because the reform is all about the changes for schools. There will be schools that will focus only on school leavers. Some schools will be focusing on primary school needs. And this is something that needs to be done in a common space. It's very difficult to work with this. Fundraising and involvement of extra budgeting is perceived usually as extra workload. We shared the experience of the United States. We spoke about their approach. We even shared about the practice when a responsible person was immediately remunerated. You know what the response was? People would say, we raised 100,000 hryvnias and we need to contribute 10% to somebody who works to administer these funds. No, we would better continue working as we're doing it now, because for people it's very difficult to allocate part of their money for intellectual job, and they say, let the Department of Education take care of that, or you, because you do it in a brilliant way. And we say, why should we do that? It's a very specific kind of communication. Opportunities are there, but the readiness to become partners and to remunerate people for this work is still not shaped in people's mentality. We still very much idealize fundraising as a tool. Unfortunately, that's true. Thank you. That's something that we have also observed. Lack of understanding that this is your ownership. That results in responsibility. This is a significant point to make. But in fact, as far as I go, 3 years is not that big a period of time. We cannot say that everything is lost. Still, future holds a lot of promises for us. Anybody else would like to issue your comments? Yes. Natalia Slobodanyuk. There are some confusions and exaggerations even during the presentation. It was mentioned when some parents themselves raise donations, they determine what needs that donation should be covering, and the school administrator doesn't even know what's going on at school. They see that there is a ceiling that should not be provided for school because of sanitation norm. So there are misunderstandings between parent community and the administration of the school regarding what is common. But if it's common, it doesn't mean that I can do whatever I choose. Therefore, it requires a lot of work to reach out to the parents concerning who must identify needs and how they must be met. It seems to me that in Ukraine, we are currently in a situation when we need to warn parents and say to them they're owners of that, but on the other hand, they need to be explained to who is chief in educational institution. So parent is a helper to educational institutional management. Thank you very much, Ms. Natalia. We need to bring our discussion to a close because we have taken more time than planned. I would like also to give the floor to Muriel because she also wanted to provide some more comments of her own. She wanted to share them with you, Muriel.
Thanks a lot, Alexandra. Yes, I wanted to really thank all of you for this very interesting discussion. It was very interesting to hear about Yuri. It's always interesting to hear from the mouth of the horse, as we say, and interesting to hear how this initiative has evolved over time, and also this kind of positive spirit that you have to make it keep on improving over time, and very interesting discussion around also the users really of the platform and all the challenges that you raised in terms of trust, of time also for people to understand how they can work and collaborate together and how to go for it. So many thanks for this very interesting exchange. I just wanted to conclude just with 2 or 3 slides, but it will be very short. Don't worry, I'm going not to start again, but just to give you an idea of where we are going to go from there. Verena, if you can put them on the screen, the second one. So just to give you an idea, so of course the idea with this case study is first that you help us share this case study as widely as possible. And so Alexandra and Oksana, I think, will be in touch with you, and you can be able also to get information to the APREC website on where to download this case study and how to share it also among your networks and other people in the future. From our side, we are going also to disseminate it internationally and also compare the results of what has been collected in terms of data at the level of Ukraine with other countries that are involved in our research. And as you see in those graphs, there were some common questions that were raised in different countries, for instance, on, well, what is your best ways of giving feedback about the project, about how confident people are that their contribution effectively, or how far people believe that education authorities are going to be held accountable for corruption, for instance, based on the information provided through the different initiatives. So I'm not going to comment on those results at this point. We are going to add new countries because we have also an initiative from the US, from Peru and Portugal to add to those. But just to let you know that we are in the move of comparing results and including fully the case of Ukraine in this context. In terms of recommendations also, that's the next slide, yeah, Verena. So there is some kind of convergence, I would say, in terms of recommendations about, for instance, importance to mobilize special actors, institutions, civil society organization as some kind of intermediate to support the initiative, about ensuring that IC tools platform are not only user-friendly, not only facilitate access to information, but more than that, help broader exchange between stakeholders. Importance of capacity training, and we've heard that again this afternoon with technical training on use of the platform, accounting, contracting for our projects. Importance of giving different feedback opportunities to people, and especially the in-person exchange clearly being of key importance in different countries. So we are also trying to consolidate the recommendation that coming out from those different open government initiatives. And if you are interested to learn more, I would like to invite you, of course, first to have access to the case study on Ukraine that you can see on your right, so the green one. But we will have other case studies also going out shortly, one on Colombia, on India, on Peru, and so on. And so, dealing with different aspects of open government, open budget, as we've heard this afternoon, but also open policy, open contracting, social audits, and so on. And so if you're interested, and that's the next one, Verena, to learn more about our work about this, I would like to invite you to connect yourself to our website, and you can see the address at the bottom, or to contact me or directly, or to follow us on Twitter, so that you get also the information about these other products that are going to come out from the research. So that's all from my side, colleagues, and I would like to thank you very much again for your attendance, your questions, and all for the exchanges that took place this afternoon. Thank you.